Welcome to the EcoParent Podcast Network. I'm Sam, the founder of EcoParent Magazine. If you listened to any of the first 5 episodes of this show, then you're familiar with the tumultuous history of EcoParent's early years. Don't worry, I won't subject you to that again. Instead, I just want to remind you of why we do this. It's for you. EcoParent has always been for you. The parents who go the extra mile to do a little better for their kids, their families, and for the planet. But the relationship is symbiotic. EcoParent also needs you. So if you like these podcasts and find that they add value to your life, if they inspire you or make you feel more connected, please share them with your friends. Reviews are also a great way to tell the listening platform that the podcast is worth recommending. So, if you're not busy driving a kid here or there, or making supper, or any of the other awesome parent stuff that you do, please take the time to pause this recording and give it a quick review, or text it to a friend.
Dad, can we record the outro?
Sure.
Can you give yourself permission to do even just one simple change and then add on to that and then add on to that and give yourself permission to be flexible with that? Committed, but flexible, and trust that it takes time.
The Feeding Families podcast is all about nutrition for kids. We bring you new ideas and inspiration for your kitchen and answers to your food questions so you can overcome the very real, very frustrating food-related challenges so many parents are trying to figure out. I'm your host, Jess Sherman, family wellness educator, author, practitioner of functional and holistic nutrition, and mother. I want you to develop unwavering confidence in the choices you make every day. So let's get into Feeding Families. Welcome back, families, to another episode of the Feeding Families podcast. I'm your host, Jess Sherman. And today we are talking about a topic that's near and dear to my heart with an amazing guest you're going to love. Our topic today is about nourishing exceptional children who have diagnoses, have autism, have sensory issues, and getting beyond this idea of fixing them and getting into the idea of truly nourishing them and helping them thrive. And when I was thinking about this, it's such an important topic. It's such a huge, juicy topic. And I thought of our guest, Susan Baker, who is here to spend some time with us. Susan has an exceptional story to share about her exceptional children. And thank you for coming, Susan. Thank you for spending this time with us.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for having me, Jessica.
Yeah, I'm excited because I'll tell you a little bit about Susan and then we'll get into it. Susan is the mom of 2 beautiful children. Andrew is 13 and Abby is 10. And she's the author of a blog called Life, Love, and Autism, where she chronicles her family's journey of growth and challenge. She's a holistic nutritionist, as am I by training. So we share that background. And I've been watching your journey, Susan. And first of all, I'm so grateful that you feel comfortable talking about it and sharing it because I've been following you for a long time. We've known each other for quite a while. And your authenticity about this journey, I know it is really helpful for other families to see. So thank you for that. And we're going to link to your blog on the show notes and also some amazing videos that you've done. So I really, really encourage people to follow up with Susan because she continues to inspire health in people through programs and social media. And you're all going to love getting to know her and getting to know Andrew, because Andrew also, is he excited about sharing his story?
Yes. Every time we communicate together, I ask him, can I share this? And he writes, it all needs to be shared. He encourages us to share our family story, to share his words, and to share that raw and authentic perspective of the story.
Yeah. That's so amazing. I think one of the reasons I wanted to have you on, I mean, our podcast is about food and it's about feeding families, but feeding goes so much deeper than food, right? Feeding is about nourishing deeply. And the time that I reached out to you, I'm like, Susan, you have to come on the podcast because you wrote something, which is where I want to start. You wrote, can we move beyond the idea of fixing our kids as though they're broken to supporting them so that they can thrive and be who they are? And so that's where I want to start.
Mm-hmm.
Can you just unpack that for us a little bit? What that means to you and a little bit about your journey with your kids?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that line, and and that came to me, I think, almost in giving myself permission and giving our family perhaps permission for allowing the journey to unfold in the way it was going to. And I think in hindsight, we learned that there is only so much control we have. We do have influence. We have very powerful tools at our fingertips, like food, like nature. But at some point, we also need to let go of what we imagine our family or our story is supposed to look like.
Mm-hmm.
And that line became almost a mantra for me because I needed to get away from this idea that, well, I'm a holistic nutritionist and I've learned that food and diet and natural health remedies, et cetera, could solve everything. And surely there is some other stone that I need to uncover so that my child who has a nonverbal autism diagnosis no longer looks like that. I love the holistic field. I find it so empowering. And yet at some point, I had to let go of the grip I had on that as the means for changing my child. And the minute I let go of that grip, possibility exploded. And that's part of the story. So it was a very hard journey. And I will say to the listeners, this is just one family story. That's something else I had to learn over time is that there are examples of children who maybe through some modalities and different treatment methods, et cetera, that they do present differently over time. We hear the term recovered, children with autism being recovered. And I think that's wonderful. I do think, though, at some point, for us anyway, we needed to get to a place where, yes, we would continue to turn over every stone. And yes, we would continue to do all the nourishing things that we could do for our children, for Andrew, but that we also needed to accept, love, even embrace this child who is standing in front of us for who he was in that moment today. Because there's otherwise an awful disconnect as a parent. You're just, well, there's got to be more. There's got to be more. And I must do something differently. And, he shouldn't be this way. I had to sort of script that for myself. Can we move beyond this idea of fixing our son as though he's broken to supporting him so that he can thrive being who he is today and who he is meant to become? And it became very empowering to do that.
Yeah, even just you saying that, those are very self-empowering words. I think I'm a big believer in the power of words, that there's a difference between fixing and supporting. Those are two very different words. They've got a lot of different energy around them, right? And even though the action that comes out of it might be the same, like for example, taking out gluten, right? Taking out gluten to fix a child is very different than taking out gluten because it's not nourishing your child. I think that there's a lot of power in just the shift in those words because it shifts your energy about them, which is going to shift your energy towards your kids and the messaging that they're hearing around the food that you're feeding them.
Definitely. And I would add to that supporting our children is almost like a warmer, more loving perspective. And that will have a ripple effect on the parent as well. So fixing makes it sound like, this is a job. I've got to do this. I need to get this right. As opposed to supporting is very allowing and forgiving in a way. Mm-hmm. I'm going to do what I can do today based on what I know today, based on what is working for us in this family within the context of how we're living today.
Yeah, I see that shift in the families that I work with. And we had a little kind of chat about it too. It's because a lot of people will come into this process the same way you did, of just like this almost, would you say it's almost guilt? Like, I wish I should have done. Maybe this wouldn't have happened if I had. Was that a part for you?
To be honest, no. And I think that is partly because of the backstory of who Susan Baker is, where I was a holistic nutritionist long before I was a mother. So I had been living a very healthy lifestyle for a good 10 years prior to having my first child, who was Andrew. And so when Andrew came along, it was almost surprising. So I didn't necessarily feel guilt, although I can totally appreciate that many families enter this journey through that portal. But I didn't feel that so much as, gosh, this is a mission. I got to get this right. I have such a wealth of experience and knowledge that I know there's more to this story from that holistic health perspective. I know where you're coming from and the conversations perhaps you've had with some of the families.
And then there's a shift at some point. I find that exactly what you experience, this shift into, it's not an acceptance. It's, I don't know. I want you to describe it because you described it beautifully. It's just like, there's still a project. There's still nourishment that has to happen. There's still support that has to happen. But there's a shift in energy that almost, it's like easing into it or easing into the flow of what needs to happen in order to support and nourish your kids.
Mm-hmm. Well, and listen, the minute we do that as the parent, our children lighten up. Can you imagine being the subject of a parent project? I need to be fixed. My mom's giving me this now. My mom is taking me to this practitioner and this practitioner and this person. And can we lighten that up a bit? Yes, let's stay motivated and empowered, but not just for our child, but for ourselves, for our family as a whole as well, so that it's sustainable. That's the other piece I feel very passionate about is, and we'll get into the details of this in a little bit, but especially when it comes to nutrition, there are so many different avenues you can pursue with diet and nutrition. Mm-hmm. And in my opinion, yes, let's do some really great diet cleanup and gut healing, but what can we take on that's sustainable for the long term? Because that is where the true healing and the true empowerment happens. Then we don't abandon everything because we've actually taken on something. So it really is about lightening our load in a way, giving ourselves permission to be human and pay attention to our other children, for example, and to trust that we will, if we can tune into ourselves as very powerful people, as parents, as humans, that we will be shown, we will learn of the tools that we need when we need them. And in the beginning, it's very difficult for new families. I experienced that myself, where you are inundated with options. There are so many different things that you could try or, utilize with your child. And you can't do it all at once. You cannot do it all at once. And it would be so overwhelming, not just for you as the parent, but for your child, that I don't think that it actually ends up benefiting. And so again, it does come back to, can I pull back for a minute and feel out what feels right now? And here's the thing, autism, I'll speak specifically about autism. And again, this is just from my experience with my child, but it is about so much more than any one thing. And so I have concerns when I hear things like, well, you got to try this, or, it's all about the diet. We're still figuring health out. We're still figuring autism out, so to speak, because each child is different. And so again, if I look at my own history, here I am, this holistic nutrition mother with this baby who's been fed only natural, whole foods, homemade, not vaccinated. I bring that up only because that is often a question for parents, and there can be an association. And so for our case, we take that out of the equation. Lots of time outside, not a lot of screen time at all as an infant, taking him to the homeopathic doctor when he needed support for colds and flus. Mm-hmm. So that's my case study, so to speak. That's my child.
Yeah. All the things. All the things.
And so then you look at that and think, gosh, wow, it's obviously about so much more than any one of those things. Because if anybody did it, this woman here, Susan Baker, did it all.
Yeah.
And so in a way, I had to give myself permission to say, gosh, you've done an amazing job of supporting your child in as much as you could do. Can you trust that you have done so much, and can you let go of what you imagined things should look like for your child, and trust that you will find that next thing that is meant to support your child, not fix and not change, but support your child. And again, once I gave myself that permission, not only did I sleep better and breathe better, I actually loved my child that much more because he no longer needed to be fixed in my mind. He just needed to be loved and supported in that moment. And I needed to love and support myself in that moment as well for doing the best job that I knew how to do at that time.
One of the pieces in your journey was that a few years ago, you allowed his brilliance to come out somehow. Or maybe that's not the right way to say it. You facilitated it because he is a brilliant child. And you guys, you can watch through the blog and through some of the videos how that brilliance unleashed itself in its really unique ways. Can you just talk a little bit about the letterboard and how he speaks and how he communicates? And then from there, I want to dig into the food piece.
Sure. So the letterboard and the method of communication that we use right now is almost the most recent stage. The nutrition and health piece and the significance of that was really nearer to the beginning and middle of the journey, although we are revisiting it all the time. So we're back right now, as he's 13, to looking at, okay, how do we physiologically support this child again, right? With hormones and stress, that type of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But if I take the listeners back to what I was saying about letting go and allowing for possibility. So when we let go of this idea of what our life and our child should look like, when we can let go of that, and how do we do that? Oh my gosh, it's very hard for some of us.
Mm-hmm.
For me, I got to a place where I didn't know what else to do. And I was in such a depleted place. I was crying a lot. My husband and I were having arguments. And I just said, I do not know how to support this child anymore. I don't know what he needs. I don't know what else would help. And that was in a place where Andrew was probably about 9 years old. And life with autism is challenging. It's less challenging. But in that moment, I remember we were going through a hard stage with him. And I just thought there has to be more to getting to know this child. And I didn't know what that looked like. I wasn't sure if I had to go to some expert doctor in the States or something like this, right? But in that moment of desperation, all I had was letting go. That's all I had left. I had to let this go. And so I did. I just stopped trying so hard. And what happened was, within a few months, I learned about a new method of communication for nonverbal kids like my son. I wasn't looking for this. I wasn't digging. I wasn't asking for this. It showed up and it changed everything. I mean, it changed the trajectory of our family's life in such a significant way. And I can see that in hindsight, but it was because of me finally letting go that possibility could be entertained, right? So something new could come along, something that I wasn't looking for, something I could never have expected. So what this letterboard method of communication is all about, and it's considered AAC, right? Augmentative communication method. Andrew has a couple different methods of communication. He uses picture symbols. He has a text-to-voice output on his iPad, which is very effective with all sorts of different people he can use that with. But he was limited to whatever is programmed into this app, right? So I'm hungry. I'd like an apple. He can say all those things. But what this letterboard method of communication allows for is more of the subjective, more of the nuances of being a human, right? So his opinions, his insight, his thoughts can come out through this method. And it is literally an A to Z letterboard alphabet stencil. You are trained in this as a communication partner with your child. There has to be trust. It's basically a system, and you go through the stages of it. And it trains both the partner and the child on a brain to motor path. So it's like brain to body output, which is very difficult for most kids on the autism spectrum. There's often a brain to body disconnect or challenge. And so this method of communication allows these children to point to the letters on the alphabet and spell out words. And I know that sounds just so obvious and maybe easy. I know for my husband and I, when we first heard of this, we thought, well, Andrew can't spell. We don't know that he knows how to spell. We've never taught him letters. We'd never sat with him and read him books. Like, this probably won't work for Andrew. But in that moment, we thought, well, we have nothing to lose. And so we sat with the trainer and we were just awestruck by even the very, very basic stuff that was coming out of Andrew. And so over months and years of practice on this method, we now have a window into Andrew that we just never had before. And the insight, and it's hard to describe. Suffice it to say that we really need to presume competence with our children. And it's not about the brilliance. It's not about thinking, well, some of our kids might be savants. It's not that. Our kids are also very challenged. I mean, they have disabilities, if you want to use that term. And so this letterboard method is just one other method of accessing who our child is, right? For Andrew, it allowed him to share his brilliance with his family, and now with more people who follow our journey.
I feel like, and correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm watching your journey from the outside, but I feel like that had a major energetic shift for you too, because I started reading your comments and it was just more like, oh my gosh, I'm in love with my child again. And it felt from an outsider's perspective that it really managed to bring you guys together and foster that sense of connection that sometimes is lacking when you're in fix-it mode. Does that make sense? When you're trying to fix your child, it's hard to connect with them because you feel like there's something wrong with them. This is what I'm sort of seeing in the people that I work with and what I kind of witnessed from an outsider. When you start to talk with them and start to communicate with them and start to accept who they are, there's this coming together, which I think allows a child to feel safe and secure and maybe access their thoughts and emotions in a different way.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah. So put the letterboard to the side. I think what you just identified is that it's when we can love and accept our child that we can connect with them better, period. That's where it happens. So the letterboard just became bonus for our family, but the love and the acceptance and, Susan letting go of Andrew as a project, that had to come first. That had to come first because that is where the breathing happened. That's where the space happened. That's where the connection with our child happened again. Can we love our child for who he is and how he is right now, right? Period. So the letterboard is bonus. Is it life-changing for many families? Absolutely. And I think most autism parents would know what I'm saying when I say it's wonderful to get feedback. So any form of feedback from your child. So yes, if you're trying this or you're doing that with them, or you've put them in a sports program or whatever it is, and you don't get any feedback. And maybe it's because your child doesn't speak, or maybe it's because your child finds it hard to put emotions and thoughts into words. It's very difficult to carry on. It's very difficult to stay motivated, but that's our role. I mean, that's our job, is to continue on. And that's what all autism families do. The letterboard method it was a gift because it gave us something back. That's why I say the step before that, though, is the letting go of needing something from your child. It's loving and accepting them where they're at in the circumstances that your family's in, right? And then bonus, when you can actually get something back, perhaps in the form of words. Did it allow us to love our child more? Not necessarily, but it was damn exciting to learn that his favorite color, in fact, was purple and not what we all thought, which was red, right? Or that he really loves bike riding, even though when we put him on a bike, he gets upset when we drive through a certain part of the neighborhood. Well, he could explain why that is. So it's insight into your child that you just didn't have access to before. And that's what changes everything. And yeah, a closeness can come from that, but it's also this feeling that you have another tool to understand your child's needs in order to perhaps support and meet your child where they're at.
Hey parents, this episode of the Feeding Families podcast is being brought to you by the Canadian School of Natural Nutrition. Whether you're looking to learn a little more about nutrition, health, and wellness, or pick up a few new recipes and cooking tips, or start a career as a holistic nutrition practitioner, there's something for everyone at CSNN. The Natural Nutrition Diploma Program is the flagship program that earns you a professional designation and title. If you just want to dip your toe in, there's the Healthy Eating and Lifestyle Certificate, the Holistic Culinary Certificate, or the Introduction to Natural Nutrition Certificate. For healthcare practitioners, CSNN offers advanced holistic nutrition workshops and certificate packages. With part-time and full-time schedules and flexible learning formats, including live online classes, there's truly something for everyone looking to improve the overall health and well-being of their family with holistic nutrition. Learn more at csnn.ca/holistic-family or follow the links in the show notes. Let's wrap around to the topic of food, because it has been a big journey for you with food, and it's been a challenge. And a lot of families, when they're in the early days of diagnosis, are told just feed them what they'll eat. It's a hard battle. A lot of kids, and not just with autism, but we can broaden it up to kids with sensory processing issues or even ADHD. There are a lot of feeding challenges around just getting food into them, textures and desires, and communicating around food. And a lot of parents kind of feel like if they're going to tackle food, it's going to rip the family apart because it's so stressful. Tell us what that piece was for you, and what advice you would have for families who have challenging kids around food and feeding.
Mm-hmm. It's such a huge topic, and it is stressful. I think that might be the first thing to acknowledge as the parents, as the family, is this is not an easy project. If you have a child who has particular tastes, has sensory issues around food, just acknowledge that this is stressful. And I think, therefore, can you give yourself permission to do what you can do, period. That's it. Just do what you can do in that moment. I will say, though, I do believe very strongly in the power of nutrients for our children. And this is where I believe holistic health comes in so powerfully for supporting our children with exceptionalities, because we need to look through multiple lenses in order to support our children. So, for example, if a child has a zinc deficiency, they're going to have a significant challenge with tastes and textures, because that's what we know zinc deficiency shows up as. And so it's worth looking at that, isn't it? Really, it's looking at how do we get these supportive nutrients into our kids, perhaps in the form of supplementation, so that we can actually give them a leg up in order to deal with their sensory issues. And I think that's really important and very empowering when it comes to natural health and the holistic health perspective. And you don't get that from the allopathic or the conventional medical system. And that's okay. The medical system serves its purpose. But it's time now, I believe, for families to start looking for different windows in. And so that's where holistic health comes in. So looking at, are there deficiencies in a child? Can you work with a practitioner who helps you understand what those deficiencies could look like? Behaviors around eating in the family as well, allowing for more time, less rush, the language around food, the behavior of the parents around food as well. And part of that is taking the stress away. That's for all children. The control that is at play when it comes to meal times is a big deal for most families, and it's sort of worth looking at. But I do believe that our kids, if we consider that we are living in a day and age where we have mass agricultural farming practices with not a lot of replenishment of nutrients into the soil, we have chemical agriculture, pesticides, glyphosate in GMO food. We are very much connected to devices and screens and less connected to nature. And this isn't a blame thing. This is just the reality of the world that we are raising children in. So if we look at that and we look at our highly sensitive children and we put them in that environment, without question in my mind, this is a case for supporting these children, because everybody needs support. But imagine being a physical body that experiences sensory overwhelm regularly every single day. Well, that alone, sensory overwhelm and stress alone require more nutrients, right? So not only are we raising these children in a world that's fairly demanding and depleted, but their bodies, because of who they are, require more nutrients. So that has to be looked at. I think I took that for granted with my background in holistic nutrition. When I raised my children, that was just a given. They were on what I call the foundational supplements, which, Jess, I know you've shared with families, from probiotics to vitamin D to a whole food concentrate. And then the list kind of goes on from there based on, I believe, the needs of the child. That's a given. That's foundational. Looking at the diet, and in our family, we eat natural, whole foods, organic as much as possible where we can get it, when we can afford it, foods without chemicals, without food dyes and food colors and preservatives. So as close to nature as possible. That's what our family strives to eat. And again, that's foundational. Our highly sensitive children, their bodies do not tolerate chemicals. We see this show up in different ways. For some kids, it might be hyperactivity. For other kids, it might be that they look a little bit dazed or spaced out. And I think that's a very important consideration. We just can't ignore that anymore. And then I think from there, for our family, we kind of went up from there. So Andrew doesn't eat gluten or dairy. And for us, I've had enough experience with him eating gluten and dairy from time to time that I know that his body doesn't do well with it. So from being more tired and actually overnight bedwetting to even in the purest form of dairy. So I was getting, you'll laugh at this, Jess, I was getting raw milk from an Ontario farmer, and I was making my own raw milk kefir. So it doesn't get more grassroots than that. And I was giving that to Andrew because I knew the power of the probiotics in a raw milk kefir. But he had subsequent ear infections over a series of months. The second I took that beautiful dairy out, they went away. And so again, parents, we need to trust our intuition and our experience. So my son does not do well with dairy. So those two are out. And then from there, I think families can get more specific. I don't like to say strict, but more specific to whatever your child's needs are. So my son does well with a more paleo-based diet. So very good quality fats, some good animal proteins, lots of vegetables, and fruit, and minimal grains, and they're gluten-free grains. And somebody might say, gosh, well, how the hell did you get to that stage, right? And if I had 3 hours with you, Jess, we would go through all the years of everything I did with Andrew. But I did put him on concentrated nutrients in order to bring back adequate nutrient levels in his body so that he could tolerate more tastes. I hid meats and veggies underneath a layer of white rice because that's how he could take it in. And what we know about the power of nutrition is that when we are consistent, and this is not overnight, those tolerances improve, right? So our ability to tolerate new foods and tastes and textures improves over time. And that's what we saw with Andrew.
I want everyone to listen to that because it's a big leap of faith for parents whose kids only eat 2-3 foods because of sensory issues to think of a time when that palate could be opened up. But I want you to hear what Susan has said, and I see this as well over and over and over, is that as you get these foods into them in whatever ways you can, the body starts to expect it and want it and need it, and the palate does start to open up.
Yep. And it's not a myth. And celebrate those wins, whatever you want to call it. It could be one food at a time. I'll never forget. In fact, I took a photo and I still have it. He was probably 5 years old. And I came into the kitchen one day and there he was sitting at the kitchen island eating a raw carrot from a bag of carrots that he'd pulled out of the fridge. Fridge door was still wide open. My jaw dropped. This child has never had a raw carrot before. What the heck happened? So I took a photo, and at the time he was using picture symbols to communicate. He didn't even have a carrot in his little binder because he never ate carrots before. So intuitively, he went into the fridge and decided to try a carrot for the first time. Well, what I had been working on for about 12 weeks prior was really upping his nutrients in the form of supplementation. And it was a labor of love. My son does not tolerate swallowing pills, chewing chewables. And so what I had to do was first and foremost commit with my own conviction that this was going to happen. And so I opened up all of the little capsules into a glass jar. I added a tiny bit of juice. I shook it up in the glass jar. I drew it into a plastic syringe. I shot the plastic syringe into his mouth, so he had to purse his lips around the syringe. So a couple swallows and the nutrients were down, and I followed it up with whatever chaser was of interest to him at the time. And I'm going to tell you, it didn't go smoothly. For a good 2 months, there was like supplement juice all over the cupboards, on the floor. He's crying. I'm crying. I'm like, this is a disaster. But I stuck with it. And within 12 weeks, Andrew's repertoire for fruits and vegetables started to expand. And that was the day that I saw him eating a carrot from the fridge. And I thought, oh my gosh, we need to celebrate this. And from there, it improved. Has it changed over the years, his tolerances? Absolutely. And that's okay. I mean, intuitively, we need to kind of flow with that as parents, know that it's going to change. But if we can be so clear on our conviction that nutrients and nutrition and food are important as fresh air and movement, then we will hold to that and trust that although it might be very difficult, if we persevere, we will see progress. You will. I mean, I can't guarantee it, but you will. And at some point, you may even have the confidence to go deeper. Maybe it's a gut healing protocol. And that's what we did with my son, Andrew. We did do the GAPS diet, which, Jess, you've probably shared with your people. It's a very labor intensive.
It's intense. Yeah, it's intense.
It's a beautiful diet, but it's very, you got to have a big commitment to it. And so we did that for 6 months. And I will say we had incredible results. I mean, textbook bowel movements, skin clearing up, great behavior improvements. Even cognitively, we could tell Andrew was much more sort of clear and crisp in his connections with us. Of course, he wasn't speaking and didn't have any other method of communication other than pictures at that time, but we could see a shift in him. And that was through committing to that GAPS diet for 6 months. But that's as much as I could do. And it's recommended for minimum 6 months to 2 years. And that's me as a holistic nutritionist who's highly motivated. So if I can say anything to other families, it's, can you give yourself permission to do even just one simple change and then add on to that and then add on to that and give yourself permission to be flexible with that. Committed, but flexible, and trust that it takes time.
Yeah. Yeah. And then there's 2 parts to it, right? And you just sort of nailed them both. And we've talked about this on other podcasts as well, that everything is connected. Every little piece that you do, whether it's working on sleep or it's working on connection or it's working on movement or it's working on hydration or it's working on nutrients, it's all connected and it's all good stuff, right? Even if you can just do one of them, start with the one and then add on the other and then add on the other. And I think of it in 2 categories. There's the nourishment part. There's, like you were saying, like getting those nutrients in and just having faith. I mean, you had such a background in that. And just for people who don't have a background in nutrition, nutrients run the body. I think of them like workers in the company, right? If they don't come to work, processes slow down, stuff doesn't get done, projects get slower, right? Nutrients are the workers in the body and we need them. So things will get better the more well-nourished your child is, regardless of whatever symptoms they may or may not have. And then the other category that you identified is the irritants, the things that are irritating kids. And all kinds of foods can irritate kids, and it's going to be different for each kid. You talked about the chemicals. Those are irritating to everyone. But these super sensitive kids who are brilliant in their capacity to sense and to feel, they've got way less wiggle room. And I see that as well. So if you're going to, start with the nourishment or you're going to start with the irritants, do whatever is doable for you.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah. And I don't know how you feel, Jess, but whenever I coached people on nutrition, I would always say to them, crowd out the irritants by bringing in more of the nutrients, because there's nothing worse than saying, well, I'm going to throw out all the chemicals, I'm going to throw out all the packaged foods, and now I open my cupboards and I got nothing. So if you can bring in the alternatives, and what's beautiful, what's amazing is that we're living in a time right now where there are substitutions for everything. I mean, you can get natural foods that are colored that don't have artificial colors in them, right? So it's brilliant. You can go to a health food store, you could go to No Frills, you can go anywhere and find a lot of these healthy alternatives. So it has become easier for families, definitely.
Yeah. Yeah, you're speaking my language. I do think from what I have seen, and I've changed over the years of, coaching with nutrition, I've changed my approach. And now when I start with people, it is all about what can we add in? How can we get more nourishment in? And as you do that, you will naturally be crowding out the stuff that they don't need.
Yeah. And you can be selective. So for example, my son loves apples. He eats a minimum of 1, if not 3 or 4 a day. And I think, oh my gosh, it could be worse. The worst is that perhaps he has loose poo. But because of how much he eats, like how many apples he eats, that's one that we're buying organic, right? So because of the pesticide load that exists on apples, we know we need to prioritize that because of the frequency and quantity of intake of apples for Andrew. I wanted to add to something you said as well. Now that we have this method of communication where we can hear from Andrew his perspective on things, I've asked him about nutrition and diet. And I'm very careful to not have leading questions like, tell me, Andrew, how important you think nutrition is, just like your mama, right? But I ask him things about the power of food or about food in general. And he has commented that food has an impact on how he feels in his body. And he feels better eating healthy foods, even if it's hard for him, is what he writes. His preference, he feels best eating fruits and vegetables, although he finds it hard. He will acknowledge that he feels better in that way. I've asked him about some of the foods that I find he's a bit repetitive with. Like he would like to eat bread all day long. And he has written that's because it's a ritualistic food for me. So it feeds a part of my brain that gets stuck. And that is like comfort. And so does that mean it's necessarily not great for him or it is good for him? What he's saying is that certain foods make him feel stuck in his mind. And so in my mind, that's where we need to actually rotate our foods, right? We don't want to give this child 10 slices of bread a day because that is at least a food that he eats. And that's different than apples. He eats a lot of apples in a day, but those apples aren't making him get stuck in his brain, is what he's trying to communicate. And there are countless cases of children with autism and adolescents and adults with autism who, when they can finally communicate, they say, my stomach hurts, my bowels hurt. And they couldn't say that before, but how did they show us that? In their behavior. My goodness, if you're constipated, you're miserable. But these children, many of them don't have a method to express that to us. And so again, as parents, can we inform ourselves as much as possible and allow ourselves to be as intuitive as possible to consider that our children may be eating foods that aren't serving their bodies very well. And that when we alleviate that stress from their body, impact on their physical, mental, emotional, even spiritual well-being is significant. It's very powerful. It's very powerful. And again, this is where holistic health comes in, is we know that what you do on the physical body impacts the mental, emotional, and spiritual health.
Beautifully encapsulated. Yeah, and it's why we do what we do, right? It's like, again, I think it's a bit of a leap of faith. Often I think parents, it's like, okay, my child is struggling. What can I do? And you want to fix them yesterday because there's nothing worse than seeing your child struggle. And often it's a call to action to say, okay, we need to clean some stuff up. We need to start to get our detective hats on and figure out how to nourish our kids, mind, body, spirit, the whole bit, connect all of it. Susan, gosh, there have been so many gems. I think people will be listening to this multiple times. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom. Now, you recently were involved in a book project. Can you tell us about that and how people can read about it and learn more?
Absolutely. I was asked to contribute our family's story to a collective anthology called Lead with Love. And it's stories from 10 different mothers on their journeys of raising children, non-specific to autism or any other exceptionalities. And so our chapter is in there, and it includes all of my children, not just Andrew. And it's probably the best summary of my motherhood journey to date, including the significant lessons of letting go, being open to possibility, and really trusting in the process, even when it's damn hard. The book is called Lead with Love. What I'm really excited about is that I am finally putting all of my stories. I've been documenting our family's journey online through the blog for many years, and I am putting those together in its own book. So our family's story will be represented as its own book, and that's coming out this year in 2022. So excited for that.
So excited for you to go through that process of writing, because I know that can really be an interesting process of reflection and communicating your story. But I'm also really thankful at how generous you are around letting people into your life and learning from your experiences and just witnessing what you're going through. I think it's really instructive and it's really helpful for parents at every stage of the journey. So thank you so much for doing that.
Absolutely.
And thank you for coming to share this. We will link to all of those things here on our show notes. Also encourage you to watch the video, Life as a Non-Speaker, an Insider's Perspective, where you can see a little bit of Andrew's life and Susan's life with the letterboard and learn about how brilliant he is. He really is a light in the world. Any last thoughts, Susan? Anything you want to leave people with in terms of parents who might be struggling to nourish their amazing, exceptional kids and are really in the trenches struggling with this?
Absolutely. Be gentle. Be gentle with yourself. Be gentle with your child. It can be very challenging, and to be gracious and gentle with yourself. And then to be open. Can you be open to a life that takes you in a direction that you could never have predicted? Can you be open to things you weren't looking for? And to keep going, It's okay to take breaks. It's important to take breaks. Autism is a full-time job. Parenting is a full-time job. But can you put one foot in front of the other day after day and just keep going? Those would be, the things I want to leave people with, because those are the things that really matter to me. So yeah, thank you, Jess, so much for having me on and for sharing this message and all of your messages to families, including families beyond autism and kids with needs and exceptionalities. A lot of these messages, I think, reach us just as humans, because that human connection, it's so full of empathy, love, and connection, because we really learn and connect through our stories.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Susan.
You're welcome. Thank you.
I'm Ransom, inspiration behind Eco-Parent magazine. I was on the cover of the first issue when I was a baby. My dad and the rest of the team have worked hard to bring the Eco-Parent podcast network to life, and I think it's pretty cool. I'd like to help out on it someday, so hit that subscribe button, share it with your friends, and give this podcast a review, so that it's still around and thriving when I learn to do the audio editing. Thanks for listening. Was that good?
Yeah, you totally crushed it.